वो भी। और ये देखिए चीन के राष्ट्रपति भारत के प्रधानमंत्री का अगवानी करते हुए उनसे हाथ मिलाते हुए, शी जिनपिंग चीन के राष्ट्रपति, शी जिनपिंग और साथ में प्रधानमंत्री नरेंद्र मोदी, इन दोनों की मुलाकात की तस्वीरें।
My brothers and sisters, the day I signed the trilateral trade agreement with both Prime Minister Modi and President Xi sitting at the same table, I knew I had broken something the West thought was unbreakable. For 70 years, they built their power on keeping Asia divided. India versus China, Beijing versus New Delhi, ancient rivals locked in eternal competition. But when I placed that pen to paper in Ouagadougou, creating the world's first India-China-Africa cooperation framework worth $47 billion, I watched something beautiful happen. Two Asian giants who hadn't cooperated in decades suddenly realized they had more in common than the West wanted them to believe. Within hours of our announcement, Washington called emergency meetings with both New Delhi and Beijing. Within days, European leaders were flying to Asia offering alternative partnerships. Within weeks, Western media was calling it the most dangerous development for Western hegemony since the Cold War ended. This is not just about trade deals. This is about the moment Africa became the bridge that united Asia against Western divide and conquer strategies. My brothers and sisters, let me tell you about the phone call that shook 3 continents. It was midnight in Ouagadougou when I dialed both Prime Minister Modi and President Xi simultaneously for a 3-way conversation that lasted 4 hours. Gentlemen, I began. While you compete with each other, the West exploits us all. While you fight over borders, they control global markets. While you argue about influence, they dictate terms to our peoples. The silence lasted 30 seconds. Then Modi spoke. What do you propose, President Traoré? Simple, I replied. Stop fighting each other. Start building together. Use Africa as your collaboration ground instead of your competition battlefield. Xi's response changed history. If Africa can host both of us as partners instead of rivals, we are listening. 2 weeks later, both leaders sat in my palace. Not as competitors, but as collaborators. The West's worst nightmare had become reality. Where Western powers offered Africa scraps from separate tables, India and China offered us a feast from one shared table. Where they demanded we choose sides, we created a third option. Choose cooperation over competition. The numbers were staggering. 15 billion from India for renewable energy infrastructure. 18 billion from China for transportation networks. 14 billion in joint industrial projects managed by both Asian powers together. But here's what made the West panic. This was not aid with conditions or loans with strings attached. This was genuine partnership where Africa benefited from Asian cooperation instead of Asian rivalry. This framework violates every principle of geopolitical competition, a leaked Pentagon document stated. They were right. We had just proven their divide and rule strategy could be defeated. For decades, Western powers told African leaders, choose between India and China, choose between democracy and authoritarianism, choose between our values and their systems. But I asked a different question. Why should Africa suffer because of your artificial divisions? India builds excellent software systems. China constructs powerful infrastructure networks. Both nations have technologies Africa needs. Both countries have markets Africa wants to access. Instead of forcing us to pick one partner, I created a framework where both partners work together on African soil. Indian IT expertise managing Chinese-built data centers. Chinese construction companies using Indian financial systems. African resources benefiting from both Asian capabilities simultaneously. The result? Africa gets the best of both worlds while Asia discovers cooperation works better than competition. My brothers and sisters, America's reaction revealed exactly how much they fear Asian unity. Within 24 hours of our announcement, Secretary of State Blinken was on a plane to New Delhi. Within 48 hours, Defense Secretary Austin was flying to Beijing. Their message was identical to both capitals. This partnership threatens regional stability. But their real fear was simpler. Asian cooperation threatens American dominance. When India and China work together instead of against each other, they don't need American mediation. They don't require American approval. They don't depend on American markets. The Pentagon's Indo-Pacific strategy collapsed overnight. How do you contain China using India when India is cooperating with China on African projects? Brussels watched Asian giants cooperating on African soil and realized their colonial advantages were evaporating. Within 1 week of our trilateral agreement, European Commission President von der Leyen announced a new partnership for Africa worth 30 billion euros. Too little. Too late. You cannot exploit Africa for centuries, then offer partnership when your rivals offer genuine cooperation. French President Macron flew to 3 African capitals that month, offering everything from debt forgiveness to military protection. German Chancellor Scholz proposed enhanced trade frameworks with immediate implementation, but their desperate offers only highlighted what they should have provided decades ago: respect, equality, and mutual benefit. This partnership creates possibilities that were impossible when India and China competed. Indian artificial intelligence managing Chinese manufacturing systems in African industrial cities. Chinese high-speed rail networks integrated with Indian digital payment platforms across African corridors. African students studying software development in Bangalore while learning manufacturing techniques in Shenzhen. African engineers working on joint India-China projects that combine Delhi's innovation with Beijing's execution. The knowledge transfer is unprecedented. Instead of learning from one Asian power, Africa gains access to both Asian powers working in harmony. For 70 years, the West maintained global economic dominance by keeping potential rivals divided. India focused on competing with China instead of cooperating with China. China worried about Indian influence instead of leveraging Indian capabilities. But when these Asian giants collaborate on African development, they create an economic bloc the West cannot control or divide. Trade flows in rupees, yuan, and African currencies without touching dollars or euros. Technology transfers happen between Asian and African partners without Western intermediaries. Investment decisions get made in New Delhi, Beijing, and African capitals without Washington or Brussels approval. The Western financial system becomes optional instead of mandatory. That terrifies them more than any military threat. My brothers and sisters, this cooperation is spreading beyond our initial framework. Vietnam wants to join Asian-African partnerships. Indonesia is exploring similar trilateral arrangements. Malaysia is studying cooperation models that bypass Western systems entirely. African nations are watching Burkina Faso benefit from Asian unity and demanding similar partnerships. Nigeria wants India-China collaboration on infrastructure projects. Kenya is exploring joint Asian investment in manufacturing facilities. The model is expanding because it works. When major powers cooperate instead of compete, everyone benefits except those who profit from division. The West built their global dominance on a simple strategy: divide potential rivals, then profit from their division. Keep India and China focused on each other instead of on Western exploitation. Keep Africa dependent on Western markets instead of developing Asian alternatives. But when Africa becomes the bridge that unites Asia, this strategy collapses. Indian and Chinese leaders realize they have more to gain from cooperation than from competition. African leaders discover they can play a constructive role in global affairs instead of just choosing sides. Western hegemony depends on others remaining divided. When others unite, hegemony becomes impossible to maintain. Close your eyes and imagine the world in 2030. India and China cooperating on massive infrastructure projects across Africa instead of competing for African resources. Asian technologies flowing freely between Delhi, Beijing, and African capitals without Western gatekeeping. African universities hosting exchange programs between Indian and Chinese students. African markets accessed through Asian financial systems that bypass Western banks entirely. African resources processed using joint Indian-Chinese technologies that keep value addition on our continent. My brothers and sisters, when Western leaders watch India and China working together on African soil, they will understand what Africa teaches all former colonial powers. Unity defeats division, cooperation conquers competition, and partnership always beats exploitation. The West spent centuries dividing others to maintain their advantages. But Africa just proved that division is not permanent, competition is not inevitable, and hegemony is not eternal. Today, Africa became the bridge that connected Asia. Tomorrow, that same bridge will connect the entire global South in ways the West never imagined possible. The trilateral agreement is signed. The cooperation frameworks are established. The joint projects are beginning. And the West is learning that their divide and rule strategy has finally met its match. When Asia unites through Africa, everyone wins except those who profited from Asian division. The future belongs to those who build bridges, not walls. Those who choose cooperation over competition. Those who understand that together we rise, divided we serve others. We are just getting started.